Hello, I'm Pat Morgan, Senior Scientist at LI-COR Biosciences. Today we're going to talk about how to clean your ergas if you need to. So on the system there's an onboard monitoring that actually looks for losses in signal strength at the detectors. Those are monitored as SS_R and SS_S for reference and sample ergas accordingly. If you notice a loss in signal strength from the time your instrument was new until you're currently using it, that may indicate that you need to clean the ergas. So it's a good practice to pay attention to that signal strength from the day the machine is brand new throughout the life of that instrument. If you do need to clean your ergas, it's a fairly simple process. So here we have a sensor head. You take that sensor head and the first thing you want to do is remove the bottom skid plate. So there are two screws that hold that in place. You set that aside. And then there are four screws that hold the chamber on. There are two, one on either side, holding these compression springs on. Those can be removed. Then there are two screws that actually hold the chamber on. I've gone ahead and loosened those two screws, one on either side, and that lets the chamber come completely off the system. You can set that aside as well. Now you're looking down at the chamber head itself, and you notice that there are two filters here. This is another good place to check for contamination on the system. If these are nice and clean, then there probably is not contamination in the system that is large particles. It could be smaller particles or condensation that happen inside your ergas. At this point, you probably want to go ahead and change these filters. If you've gotten this far, they're fairly inexpensive and it's a good practice to change those out periodically. The next step is to take, once again, your screwdriver, and there are two screws that are contained down along the side here. And you simply go in, loosen those up, and that will allow you to remove the heat sink. We supply a number 2 screwdriver that has got a long shaft that allows you to reach in and loosen these screws without having to do that. Now if you don't have the LI-COR provided screwdriver, you can find any number 2 screwdriver that will work. These are simply Phillips head. The system is designed in such a way that everything you should have to remove is Phillips head and is also metric. So worldwide you should have wide availability of screws, and of course if needed you can always contact LI-COR and we will supply screws for you. So I've simply removed the thermal unit and the handle that comes off as one complete body, and now you're looking at the erga component. So this is the ergas, and there's a plate. This bulkhead has holes that allow the air to pass through out to the chamber, and this bulkhead is once again removed very quickly and easily with that same number 2 screwdriver. There are two screws that are simply removed, and that will allow that bulkhead to come off. Now you want to retain those screws somewhere that's very handy and accessible, because those screws are going to become a handle for the mirrors of the erga. And so once we get these two screws off, you can take and pivot the bulkhead forward and down. There's a ribbon cable that you want to be careful of. You don't want to remove that ribbon cable. You can clean the ergas at this point without removing that ribbon cable. You want to hold the bulkhead to the side to prevent any damage to that ribbon cable, kind of holding that in place. You'll notice that once you're inside the ergas, there are two gold mirrors, and those gold mirrors can be removed to access the ergas interior. Remember those screws that we set aside earlier? Those provide a nice handle. There's a threaded hole that they screw down into that allows you to put that on to provide a handle. You want to treat that gold mirror like a lens, and so you don't want to be touching it or potentially scratching that, and so that screw makes a nice handle. There are 6 small screws that can be loosened with a hex key that we provide. I've loosened those already, except for the last one. You loosen that last screw up, and the whole assembly can be removed from the ergas, making sure to get all of those screws completely loose. You can take that mirror out of the system, and you'll notice that there is 2 O-rings on the interior of that mirror. The reflective surface is where the infrared radiation bounces off to complete the path length inside the ergas. You want to check these 2 mirrors for any contaminants. You can clean those mirrors. They can be cleaned with lens paper and deionized water. If you do need to use something like an alcohol, you want to use an isopropyl type alcohol to remove some contaminants, but then be sure and rinse that with a deionized water. If you do use an isopropyl alcohol, you want to replace those two O-rings. Those O-rings are held in place. You may be able to see there's a very small little notch that allows you to reach in and lift that O-ring out with a very small tool, something like a jeweler's screwdriver. Those O-rings are captured so they don't fall out, which makes the replacement of the mirror much easier than it would be otherwise. When you look down into the instrument now, you can see that there are two open holes. Those open holes are the path link of the infrared gas analyzer. Those can be cleaned with a foam swab, once again provided in the spares kit. You simply want to use deionized water and clean down inside that opening, gently turning. You don't want to be bending and twisting on that too much, because there are some components inside that instrument that are not within this path link, but if you try and reach around the corners, you could potentially damage those thermistors that are contained inside the instrument. Once you've thoroughly cleaned the instrument, both the lenses on the back of this hole for the ergas as well as the mirror, then you can reassemble the instrument. Simply you start with the mirror, putting all 6 of those screws back in. I find it's easier to install those screws from the outside, holding that mirror. They fall down in place. You notice that mirror is actually held at an angle by the screws, and that holds the screws in place. Once you get them all in place, you can take that mirror and it will set back down in. There's actually a little lip that holds that mirror in place. So it holds that mirror in place. Once you get it installed correctly, it's simply tighten up all 6 of those screws. Get those tightened down. Now you notice how I'm using this hex key. I'm not using it on the long axis to twist that down. And that's really important. This is a very small hex key. The screws are also very small, and you can very easily over tighten those screws, causing the screw to be stripped out. And in that case, it's almost surely a trip back to LI-COR for repairs. Once you get the mirror installed and tightened down, you remove the larger screw that was acting as the handle, and you can reinstall the cover plate onto the instrument. So once you have the bulkhead installed, you want to take those 2 screws that you were using as a handle and reinstall those back into the instrument. Now you notice when I was cleaning the instrument, I only demonstrated cleaning one side. When you actually do it yourself, you want to clean both sides of that instrument by removing both of those mirrors, in which case you'd use both of these 2 screws as a handle. They go back in with that same number 2 screwdriver that we used previously, and you notice we're basically doing a reverse of the process that we did to take the instrument apart. Once you've tightened that bulkhead down with those 2 screws, you take the sensor handle, the sensor head handle, and the thermal unit and reinstall that. There are 2 centering pins that help you get that aligned correctly, and those 2 captive screws are in place to be tightened down on the system. Now, as you're working through this system and you need additional guidance or information, the manual is always a good place to go, as well as our website, both of which contain a lot of information that can assist you as you're working on your instrument. And as always, you can go to LI-COR Technical Support, contact us either through the website or the phone lines for additional information on working with your system. And once you get that thermal unit back on, then you're ready to install whichever chamber you're using and go make measurements out in the field.